Remember like the early days of COVID? It felt like, I don't know, suddenly everyone and their dog had a theory about what was going on.
Oh, yeah, it was a wild time, right? Tons of info, tons of theories, some more out there than others. And that's what we're looking at today. Not to say which COVID theory was right or wrong, but more like, why did so many pop up in the first place?
Exactly. Even if you hear a theory and you're like, no way people believe that, there's got to be a reason it caught on, especially during a crisis like that.
It shows us how we, as humans, deal with the unknown. The sources you sent me, they cover a lot of ground. Lab origins, the whole pandemic idea, 5G, anxieties about the vaccine, even something called the Great Reset. A lot to digging for.
Okay, so before we can get to the specifics, I'm guessing the pandemic itself, just the whole situation, made it easy for these kinds of theories to, like, take root.
Absolutely, think about it. A brand new virus spreading everywhere super fast. Information was changing all the time, sometimes even contradicting itself. And the stakes were, well, life or death for a lot of people. Uncertainty was the name of the game.
Yeah, I get that. Even for people who, like our listeners, love to learn and figure stuff out, that much uncertainty can be really unsettling.
It creates this vacuum, right, where even people who love to learn, they're going to try to fill it with something. And a simple explanation, even if it's not totally accurate, can feel really appealing in that moment.
It's like when your internet goes out, you might not have a clue how to fix it, but just knowing there's some reason, even if you blame the router when it's not actually the router's fault, it makes you feel less helpless, right?
Perfect analogy. That need to feel in control to point at a cause, that gets way stronger when the real answers are complicated. All nuanced and changing all the time.
So we've got this mix of fear, confusion, everyone wanting to understand, but then you add social media on top of that, and, well, things kind of explode, don't they?
Totally. The way social media works, algorithms, it's all about engagement. So stuff that makes people react strongly, whether it's likes, shares, arguments, it'll spread faster even if it's not true. It doesn't care about accuracy, just attention.
It's like junk food for the brain. We get that dopamine hit from getting riled up or intrigued, and we keep scrolling, even if we're not actually learning anything real.
Exactly. And the more we click on that kind of content, the more the algorithm's like, here's more of that. Suddenly, you're only hearing from people who agree with you, and it's hard to see any other viewpoint.
So the perfect breeding ground, like you said. Okay, so let's dive into some of these theories. Where do we even start?
Well, one that really took off was the idea that the virus was made in a lab.
Yeah, I remember this one. Everyone pointing at the Wuhan Institute of Virology saying it was a bioweapon or something.
Right. And to be fair, the lab leak idea, it hasn't been 100% ruled out by scientists.
So for our listeners who like to dig into the details, there's some nuance there. But even if it could have leaked from a lab, that's not the same as saying someone made it on purpose, right?
Huge difference. But that's where things get interesting. Even the possibility of a lab leak plays into existing fears, about powerful countries, secret agendas, the whole we don't know what they're up to thing.
It's like a movie plot, way more exciting than a virus jump from an animal.
And that's what often drives these theories, that gripping story, even when the proof isn't really there.
Okay, so lab origin theory, check. What else was bubbling up in the internet stew?
How about this one that the whole pandemic was fake?
Ah, the plandemic. The idea that some group, like a government or shadowy elites, cooked this whole thing up.
Yep, that's it. Population control, changing the economy, you name it. And I'll admit, even I was like, at some of the confusing stuff officials were saying early on.
Right, like things were changing so fast. But to say the whole thing was made up, I mean, the impact was real, wasn't it?
Exactly. Hospitals overloaded, economies tanking, people dying to say it was all fake, ignores a mountain of evidence, real stuff that happened.
But again, I get it. People want a clear explanation, even if the logic is a bit, well, stretchy.
A simple enemy to fight, even if it's more in people's minds than reality.
Okay, lab origins, the hoax. Ready for the one that really wish you scratch your head?
Talking about the 5G thing?
The one where 5G was causing COVID? I gotta admit, even for me, someone who loves learning new stuff, this one just, wow.
Yeah, it's out there. But even here, we can see how people's anxieties play a part. 5G was this new tech, invisible, kind of mysterious.
And there were already worries about like radiation and stuff. So when you're scared and looking for answers, it's easy to connect those dots, even if they don't really make sense.
Fear makes us grab onto explanations that feel solid, even if the science just isn't there.
Lab origins, the hoax, the 5G theory. What's next on our conspiracy theory tour?
This one's still relevant today, the idea that the vaccines were dangerous or part of some bigger plan.
Oh yeah, this one went deep. Microchips, changing your DNA, all kinds of stuff tapping into those fears people have about their health, what goes into their bodies.
For sure. And then you add distrust of big pharma, government agencies. It's the perfect recipe for misinformation to spread.
Especially because those vaccines were developed so fast, Even someone who trusts science might have been a little uneasy about that.
Right. Legitimate concerns about health get mixed up with distrust and wanting easy answers. It's powerful stuff.
And this one had real consequences. People not getting vaccinated because of these theories.
Which shows how we handle information matters, especially in a crisis.
So lab origins, the hoax, 5G, vaccine worries. Is there a final boss in this COVID conspiracy lineup?
From what you sent, the Great Reset might be it. It's more complicated, but basically it claims the pandemic was planned to create a new world order, one that's often described as, totalitarian, controlled by a small group of elites.
The Great Reset sounds like a sci-fi movie.
Right, and that's part of why it's so appealing. Loss of freedom, economic inequality, too much power in the hands of a few. It plays into those fears.
So it's like all the other theories kind of feed into this one big idea.
Exactly. It's a way to connect the dots, make sense of everything, even if it's based on stuff that's not true.
Wow. Okay, so those are some of the big COVID theories. What I keep wondering is, what evidence do people even use to back this stuff up? A lot of it sounds pretty far-fetched.
That's the big question. And it's something we're going to dig into a lot more after. Well, let's just keep going. No need for a break. A lot of what's presented as evidence, when you look closely, it doesn't really hold up. A lot of what's presented as evidence, when you look closely, it doesn't really hold up.
So not exactly stuff you'd find in a scientific study, huh?
Not quite. You see a lot of, misinterpreting data, cherry picking, taking only the bits that fit the theory and ignoring anything that doesn't.
It's like building a house of cards. Looks impressive from far away, but the slightest breeze and...
Exactly. And for every one of these theories, there's a ton of actual research, real-world data that just doesn't support it.
So, okay, if the evidence is weak, why do people believe it? What's going on in their heads?
It's a good question. And the sources you gave me, they point out something important. Believing in these theories, it doesn't necessarily mean someone's gullible or, not smart.
So it's not just about falling for fake news, then?
Not always. It can be a way to deal with fear, uncertainty, to try and get some control back when everything feels chaotic. Remember we were talking about how people crave a simple explanation?
Right, like when your computer crashes and you blame it on, I don't know, the fact that Mercury's in retrograde or something, even though that makes no sense.
Exactly. Your sources talk about a few key factors why this happens. One is distrust, of institutions. That's been growing for a while, but the pandemic probably made it worse.
Because think about it, even if you weren't into conspiracies before, there was a lot of mixed messaging from officials early on.
Oh, for sure. All those guidelines changing, experts saying different things.
Enough to make anyone busy, especially when it felt like, well, so much was at stake.
Totally. And that inconsistency, even if it wasn't on purpose, it makes people lose trust. So when a different story pops up, one that's simpler, it can seem more believable, especially if you already doubt the official sources.
So it's not just the theories themselves, but like the whole environment they pop up in. What might sound crazy normally, it can suddenly gain traction when there's a crisis because people are scared and don't know who to believe.
Exactly. And that distrust, it doesn't always come from a bad place. Sometimes people have genuinely been ignored, misrepresented, let down by those in power, so they're already skeptical.
So it's more complicated than saying, oh, these people just hate science or something.
Well, more. It's about understanding why someone might believe this, what they're feeling, not just labeling them.
Distrust, got it. What else are these sources saying?
The power of a simple story. Our brains love patterns, cause and effect, We like stories with heroes and villains, clear explanations.
It's like even in movies, we want that plot twist, even if it's a little unbelievable.
Great way to put it. In conspiracies, they often have that satisfying story arc. It makes messy events feel neat, even if it's not accurate.
So instead of trying to understand virology, global economics, all that, it's easier to say, this group is controlling everything. One bad guy to point out.
Exactly. And that simplicity is really appealing, especially when we're overwhelmed. Makes the chaos feel a little more ordered.
Like finally cleaning out that junk drawer. Everything has a place, even if it's not perfect. It's better than the mess,
I like that image. It captures how comforting a simple story can be.
Okay, distrust, simple stories. What else?
The need to feel in control. When things feel like they're spiraling, definitely at the start of the pandemic, we try to grab onto something we can influence.
Even if it's blaming 5G towers for a virus?
Right, because then at least there's something you can do, fight against those towers or whatever. It's more appealing than feeling totally powerless.
So it's not just about whether the theory's true or not, but what believing it gives you emotionally. A sense of control when everything feels out of control.
Exactly. And that feeling, it's strong. It makes people stick to even the weirdest explanations just because it makes them feel like they can do something.
It's trust, simple stories, the need for control. Your sources also mention culture, like how that plays a role. What they mean?
Well, these theories, they don't just appear out of nowhere. They often tap into fears that are already out there in society, making them even bigger.
So like anxieties about technology, the gap between rich and poor, people losing their freedoms.
Right. Conspiracies, they're like a warped mirror. They show us our fears, but in a distorted way.
Like those funny mirrors at a carnival. Twisted, maybe scary, but not the real you.
Perfect. And just like those mirrors, conspiracies can mess with how we see the world. It's hard to see clearly.
So instead of talking about, say, how technology impacts us, we get a theory about 5G causing a pandemic. Simple, dramatic, even if it's not real.
And by turning these fears into a big conspiracy, it makes people feel like they're part of something, fighting against a hidden enemy.
Like a secret club with their own code words and knowledge.
Exactly. And belonging to something that's powerful, especially when the world feels lonely. It's tempting to join a group that says we have all the answers, even if those answers are more about fear than truth.
Okay, so we've got psychology, culture, all feeding into why people believe this stuff. But where does critical thinking come in?
That's the key. Your sources talk about it a lot. Critical thinking, it's like the vaccine for conspiracy thinking. It's about questioning what you hear, looking at the evidence, being open to changing your mind.
So instead of just believing something because it feels good, like confirms what you already think, you got to dig deeper. Be okay with being wrong sometimes.
Exactly. Especially online, where false info spreads so fast, you got to be careful what you believe.
So we've covered a lot how the pandemic made these theories more likely, the big ones that went around, how the evidence is often weak, and all the psychology and culture stuff that makes people more likely to believe. What I'm hearing is it's not really about being right or wrong. It's about understanding why people think this way.
That's a great way to put it. We're all biased. We all take shortcuts in our thinking, especially when we're scared or overloaded with info.
Which is why thinking critically and being smart about what we see online is so important.
Couldn't agree more. And we're going to talk about that even more after. Well, we're on a roll. Let's just keep going. Couldn't agree more. And we're going to talk about that even more after. Well, we're on a roll. Let's just keep going.
Okay, so we've looked at how the pandemic, kind of created this perfect storm for these theories, talked about the big ones, how the evidence is often iffy, and the whole psychology of why people might believe this stuff. It seems like it's less about, proving someone right or wrong and more about getting why they think that way.
Exactly. It highlights something really deep about being human, I think. We need to make sense of things, even when we're facing the unknown.
We want a story, right? Something that explains it all, even if it's not totally true or based on, solid facts.
Yeah, and when there aren't clear answers, our brains are amazing at filling in the gaps, often with stuff that just confirms what we already believe, even if it's not accurate. It's like a mental shortcut to make a complicated world simpler.
So this isn't just about COVID, is it? This could happen with anything, right? Like political stuff, natural disasters, even just trying to figure out why your favorite team keeps losing.
You got it. Anything that's confusing, scary, something we can't control, we're going to reach for simple explanations, even if they don't really make sense when you look closely.
Like that saying, never let the facts get in the way of a good story.
Exactly. And the stronger our emotions are, the more this happens. Fear, anxiety, anger, they cloud our judgment, so we're more likely to believe something if it fits how we already feel, rather than looking at the evidence objectively.
So what can we even do about it? Are we stuck repeating this every time there's a crisis or something we don't get?
Not necessarily. I think knowing this is happening is a big first step. The more we understand our own biases and how our minds work, the better we can resist, falling for misinformation. We can be more critical.
Like building up our mental defenses against this stuff, the more we practice thinking critically, the stronger we get.
Great analogy. And it's like physical immunity, too. It's got to be ongoing. You got to stay vigilant, keep challenging what you think, look for different viewpoints, and really check information before you just accept it as true.
Be like a detective, right? Look for clues, question everything. Don't just jump to conclusions based on the first thing you see.
That's it. And remember, it's okay to be skeptical. Not cynical, not assuming everyone's lying, but approaching things with a curious mind, wanting to understand, but also being cautious.
So instead of immediately believing or dismissing something, we should be like, where'd this info come from? Is there proof? Are there other ways to look at this?
Those are the right questions. And another tip, watch out for stuff that's trying to make you feel a certain way. Like super angry, scared, or like you're better than everyone else. If it's pushing those buttons, take a step back and really look at it.
Because those strong emotions, they can trick us into believing something without thinking it through.
Exact, yeah. It's a classic way to spread misinformation because when we're emotional, we don't think as clearly.
So we talked about critical thinking, being smart about what we see online, having those good conversations, even with people we disagree with. But why does all this even matter? Is it really a big deal if some people believe in conspiracy theories?
It's a good question. And to be fair, not all conspiracy theories are the same. Some are more harmful than others, and people can believe what they want, right? But this misinformation, especially during tough times, it can have real consequences.
Like people not getting vaccinated or ignoring like public health advice because they believe something that's not true.
Exactly. It affects everyone's health, makes people trust important institutions less, and can even lead to, unrest and fighting. Makes it harder to solve problems together when we can't even agree on what's real.
And sometimes it can be, well, literally life or death.
Sadly, that's true. And beyond that, all this misinformation, it makes it harder to have good conversations, make good decisions as a society.
Because if we can't agree on the basics on what's true, how are we supposed to work together on big, complicated problems?
It becomes almost impossible. That's why thinking critically and being smart about what we read and see online, it's so important. It's not just a nice idea, it's crucial for navigating the world today.
So this isn't just about, debunking those COVID theories. It's about giving ourselves the skills to deal with a world that's full of information, where it's harder and harder to know what's real.
Exactly. It's about being a good citizen, making informed choices, thinking for ourselves so we can separate fact fiction, real evidence from just guessing, and thoughtful arguments from, stuff designed to manipulate us.
Well said. Sounds like a big task, but one worth doing.
Definitely. And we don't have to do it alone. We can learn from each other, share what we know, and build communities where critical thinking and respectful debate are valued.
That's encouraging. So to everyone listening, keep asking questions, keep learning, and keep those BS detectors turned up high.
And remember, even when things are uncertain, even when the world feels messy, there's always hope for a future where we're all more informed, more connected, and yeah, just smarter about all this.
And that's a wrap on our deep dive into those COVID-19 conspiracy theories. Thanks for joining us. And until next time, stay curious and keep those minds sharp.